in the next couple of minutes. Thank you, Jared, if that was you who started the recording. Whoever did that, appreciate that. So this is the beginning of our reporting and VITA boot camp week. We entitled it Extension Reporting and VITA, Your Data Matters. So we're going to start today by talking about why we do reporting and kind of get down a little bit into what compels us not to report, so that we can help understand what we need to do to make reporting easier for you, better for you, how we need to get our data, that sort of thing. And joining me today is Dr. Greg Davis, our department head in Extension. We're going to do this a little bit different today. We're going to, I'm going to start out with a few slides, just reminding you about some things with reporting, talk a little bit about my career experience in reporting, ask you a couple of questions, and then I'm going to ask Greg some questions, because Greg and I have been involved in this conversation, probably almost since I got here, about reporting and both of our experiences with it and trying to figure this thing out. So it's going to be a question and answer session where I'm going to interview him. I'm going to ask him some questions. And then if you feel like jumping in and want to ask Greg a question, that's fine too. Tomorrow, Teresa and Melinda are going to be talking about writing goals and objectives. And then on Thursday and Friday, Debbie is going to dig into some of the details about VITA reporting. So we will record all of these sessions and they'll be available on our website. So with that, I'm going to get started, and I do have just a few slides for you. So I'm going to share my screen real quick. And I should have said, for those of you who don't know me, I'm T. McCoy. I'm Director of the Learning and Organizational Development Unit here at Ohio State University Extension. And joining me are several of my LOD teammates on the call today as well, on the Zoom meeting. So we've entitled this Reporting Your Data Matters, and it is your data. So we're going to discuss today why it matters and why we have to do it, and think about what do we want to report that matters, and then what would that reporting look like? So I've been teaching this in terms of reporting requirements and compliance for over a decade now. And one of the things that I have started to point out to people, because I'm not always sure that people in Extension or at a land-grant university understand the legal requirements that we have to report. And I actually, several years ago, I got the Smith-Lever Act and I read it. I did the reporting for Maryland for over a decade. And I finally decided to pull out that Smith-Lever Act and see what was in there. So I read the original Smith-Lever Act and then read the amended Smith-Lever Acts. And what I need for you to understand is that when we say we have to have some data, that you have to report the data, it's not me being mean to you. It's not Craig being mean to you or Debbie or anybody else. We are required by law, an act of law in the Smith-Lever Act, to create a plan of work, and we are required to have a report of accomplishments. And that's how we get our federal funds. Once we file what was called the plan of work, but you're going to hear some new language around that. They call it the institutional profile, and our report of accomplishments before they will release our plan of work. Now, over the years, I've heard extension educators say, well, extension educators have said to me, well, T, for all that work it takes us to do for federal reporting, I'd say, I would advise just let them keep their federal money. We can do without it. Well, you know, $11 million in Ohio, I'd say look to your left, look to your right, because somebody's going to be gone if we don't have that $11 million. And in addition, that those federal funds help us then to be eligible for competitive funding, which also brings in a lot of money as well. And then the states are required to match federal funds. So it's a lot of money on the line for us. So I have the text there if you ever want to go read it, if you're a little bit nerdy like me in that regard. So in that Smith-Lever Act, they get into details about how they make payments about our money. I did want you to see this too. This is part of the amendments of the Smith-Lever Act in terms of requirements related to our plan of work, asking for us to identify critical short-term or immediate, long-term agricultural issues in the state and what we're going to do to address those issues. It also requires us, so if you've ever wondered about extension advisory councils, and of course we believe it's the right thing to do, we believe it's the right way to build programs in that we go and talk to our communities, but it is also in the Smith-Lever Act that we are required to consult with our extension users regarding critical issues. And then we're also required to identify what's called multi-state programs that we run, our collaboration with other states. And we're also required to talk about how we integrate research and extension activities, because that is, after all, the backbone and the beauty of the land grant system. So just to get that out front, we have to do it. It doesn't mean that we have to make it painful, but we have to do it, right? So the other part about this in reporting is also about compliance and accountability. And I think some of you know that I always say I'm a bit of an anomaly in extension in that I don't come from a traditional background area, 4-H or FCS or ag or community development. I come back from a background of public administration and public policy. And so coming from that background, one of the things that I read a lot because I had to were the Federalist Papers. And one of my favorite quotes of all time comes out of the Federalist Papers by James Madison. And I guess I'm not so nerdy now because we now have a hit Broadway about the founding fathers, right? Hamilton. So I'm feeling a little bit better about myself these days. But anyway, James Madison said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And so I'd like to think that we all would do the right things if there were compliance and accountability regulations required of us, but we have compliance around civil rights, we have compliance around our program offerings and making sure that we're going out into the community and reaching everyone in that community, not just select audiences. And we have compliance and accountability for our hiring, and that we're making our positions open to anybody who's interested. We're not hiring just certain people. So you all have all of that background. So that's the legal bundle right there. Said very shortly, not a lot of time, but those are the things that we have to do. Then the other thing I wanted to talk about was from a planning perspective. When we talk about planning, I always want to see the data. It's like I said, I went to the Smith-Lever Act and read it because in a way I wanted to see the data. What is the data in that says, oh, you have to do a plan of work. Oh, you have to do report of accomplishments. So for me, without data, it's hard to plan. So that's one of the reasons. I've worked with new educators who come into a county. There hasn't been another educator there for years sometimes, and so there aren't any files. And they say, well, where do I start? There's no data. How do I do any program planning? So one of the first things that we have to do is we go out, we do a needs assessment in the community. We look at that community. We get secondary data about that community and begin looking at the data in order to start planning for the future. So Debbie Lewis is going to laugh, but I always love to use some of these Fresh Spectrum. This is actually the evaluation comic. If you think such a thing couldn't exist, now you know it does. So we have to have data, we have to have reporting in order to do good, solid program evaluation and to be able to describe and tell, how is that program going? So, it's what the one person saying, can you describe how the program is doing? And the other person says, no, but I can give you some numbers based on crazy assumptions and lots of big data. Well, we're a research university. We are scientists. We are educators. We want to base what we do, our programs. We want to make them better based on good, solid data, good evidence that we have from our program evaluations, and making sure that we're meeting the needs of the community, that the program is working well, it's achieving what we wanted to achieve when we built that program. So I want you all, I'm going to take just a minute of silence, and I want you all to read this, and then I'm going to ask you a question. And I promise you it's not about specific content. It's not a quiz based on words that's in here, but I just want you to read it for a minute. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, but I would like, if there's some brave soul here who would be willing to guess what year this was written. What year was it published? And I'll tell you, it's from the Journal of Extension. You can unmute yourself and call out a year. I'm going to outweigh you on this one. I need a brave soul.
Teresa,
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to suggest 1985.
Oh, so close. Lower.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, anyway, it's 1983. 37 years ago. And I've read this several times over the years in the Journal of Extension. And sometimes I think, gosh, 37 years. And if I'm really in a state of despair, I'll be like, we've been at this for 37 years. Why haven't we got it right? And so Greg and I have had some of that conversation as we go along. So again, we're committed to, we want to get it right here in Ohio in 2020. So 37 years, 1983, we've been struggling with these issues around evaluation and reporting. All right. So, one of the things that Debbie has talked to me about, and Debbie, you're always welcome to jump in and join in, is a reporting culture. How do we have a reporting culture in our organization? And when we're talking about reporting culture, I will tell you, and so I haven't been in Ohio yet for a full cycle of reporting, but I can tell you based on my past career experiences, that generally what happens is in December, there's a flurry of activity as we all go to the reporting system to try to get our data in for the year, because we need it for CVs or your annual reports or whatever. There hasn't been a culture. We haven't been able to create a culture. When I say we, from evaluation, reporting, work, that we're doing this on a consistent basis, whether it's monthly or quarterly, and that we're actually looking at that data and using that data to inform what we're doing. So we've been pushing that big rock up that hill for a long time, and we're thinking about investigating, well, how do we change that? How do we make it so that it's not a horrible burden for the user, for you, for us, as we try to extract data? How do we make it better? How do we move into the culture where we're actually using our data to help do that planning, to help look at our programs, to see who they're reaching? So we want to talk a little bit about that, probably throughout this week. And then I wanted to talk to you, again, Debbie and I, and well, I guess all of the LOD team really, um, are excited about the data visualization tools that are out there. This is something I've never, only in one project have I ever been really able to push the data into a dashboard and make that work really well. But very excited about all the data visualizations, the data visualization tools that are out there. And one of my beliefs is that that has been a barrier to people reporting because you couldn't see your data. It just, as you know, everybody likes to say, it goes into the black hole. How it comes out is not a way that you need to see it. Pardon me. So dashboards, infographics, I mean, we've all seen a lot of them in the past couple of years, some done well, some not done so well. But that's exciting when we think about data visualization. The other thing that's exciting in terms of data visualization is video and how we're using video to tell our story. And if any of you were with us on Friday when Brian Rayson presented, did a great job, great session on how we tell stories and the importance of storytelling in our culture. So, those are three major tools that we have at our disposal. And so this is just my email address for those of you who don't have it. But I'm going to come out of the slideshow now. And before I go on, does anybody have a comment or anything you'd like to say before Greg and I start discussing? Okay. All right, Greg. I did let him see the questions beforehand. I'll have to tell you all that.
Thank you very much. They're good questions. They really are.
So Greg, as I was thinking about this, thinking about our many conversations over the past few months, since taking this position as department head and as our associate director, you've talked with cabinet, we've had conversations with area leaders about wanting to make reporting easier. What is it about reporting that has made this a goal for you?
Mm-hmm. So I love the 1985 Journal of Extension reference. I wasn't here then, but I've been in a variety of roles within Extension, and I'm a community development guy. And so when you talk about public administration and your background and the rationale as far as reporting, to me, it's all about conveying your value. Why are you here, right? And so from a community development background, and I think in most cases, folks might scratch their head and say, well, what is Extension community development? Who does that? Who are our Extension seekers? Mm-hmm. I think my perspective from the beginning was one where I felt like we really had to justify why we existed. And so generally, at least in those days when I first started, to have an Extension CD educator in a county, it was kind of a rare thing, and it's still a rare thing today. And so for me, it's all about being able to articulate the return on that investment. And so you talk about how we're funded, right, with federal, state, local dollars, and in many cases, other grant dollars fund specific projects. And so we constantly have to explain that return on investment, right? There isn't any one of us that just deserves to have a position, right? And so when we're funded publicly with public dollars, and you talk about the Federalist Papers and the role of government, that's all about community development. So mm-hmm. I think I asked you about reporting in your interview. So you and I, we've been on the same page, I think, from the beginning. But for me, it's really about helping ourselves, right, as an organization and as individuals and as teams, better articulate what it is we do. And so the story that we need to tell is totally dependent on who it is we're talking to, whether it's our supervisor, or maybe it's a county commissioner, maybe it's the head of the local master gardener organization. I mean, it might be someone at the State House, it might be someone with NIFA. And so it all depends. It might be a funding source, right? An extramural funded project, right? That you have to at some point explain, what did you do? What did you do with these dollars? So for me, having lived in the system for a while and seeing how we have struggled I mean, you showed the illustration of pushing that rock uphill, a hill that never seems to go downhill. Yeah, I thought to myself, okay, so if I'm in a role as the head of the department, and that's a totally different conversation about what the Department of Extension is, we can set that another time. But also the position that's charged with programs overall in Extension reporting is about programs. And so I told myself, I have absolutely got to make reporting in every sense of the word easier. And so that right now, that's one of the #1 agenda items.
So Greg, you said you want to make reporting easier. So when you vision that system or that whatever it is, that reporting system, so what do you see? What's in that bubble, over your head?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
like in the comics?
Yeah, it's very clear. Like, who's interested in your work. Right? You may even know them as people, right? It's not just a system, right? So there's certain people that are in your mind, like, well, Greg wants to know about this, and my local commissioner wants to know about this, and Teresa wants to know about that. And so you start to think, well, what it is I'm working on today or this week or this month or even this year, these are the specific people, like you can see them. This is who is interested in this work, and this is why, right? So I think right now, from my perspective, all of it's very cloudy. Like we throw out the word reporting and we say, well, we need to report. And then there's 15 different ways that we can and should report on 25 or 30 or 100 different things. And so all of a sudden it becomes just, it's a storm. It's a storm of questions and individuals that you don't even really know, and you don't ultimately know where it goes, right? And so you talk about 11 million from NIFA, well, you can kind of get your arms around that. But when you think about my own personal position, how much of the 11 million goes toward me, right? So for me, it's about clarity. And so you say, well, this is why it matters. This is who it matters to, including yourself, right? And so part of the system in my mind is talking about how all the different needs for reporting come together so that it's much cleaner and clearer and ultimately simpler. Because I know you mentioned it, and I've lived through this. I have colleagues that do this, right? January 14th, they sit down and they pull out it might be a manila folder, it might be an Excel file. There's a handful of folks that report on a weekly or monthly basis, but I think that's generally the exception, not the norm. So how do we make it easier so that it's like everyday work and you're excited to tell someone what you did today? That, I think, to me, that's the goal.
So, yeah, you're talking about the individuals that have interest in particular pieces of information. There's a lot of competing interest in terms of the things we should report. I work with 4-H educators in Maryland, originally coming up with a list of indicators, and I think we started at close to 300 because nobody would give up anything, right? And I've worked with FCS educators in that same regard, ag educators. And as soon as we start to begin to focus, people become worried about, well, but I do this program and you're saying you're not going to measure that, or we're not going to somehow attend to it. So how would you go about helping our system reconcile these differences, coming to agreement about what we must have?
For me, if you know me at all, I'm all about the team. So I think step one is to have a team-wide conversation. And when you think about programs, I totally hear what you're saying, right? So we're all doing things, right? Some of them we're doing in a team environment, whether it's within our own county or a multi-county area. It might even be on a statewide basis, which is cool. But then we're also doing things at a team level programmatically, right? And so, for example, 4-H, right? 4-H, and Kirk will be the first to say, well, there's certain things we have to do. We can't not do these. And he'll say, that doesn't leave a lot of extra time for cool, new, innovative things, right? Because we have to do these. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have it's that uphill push. Absolutely. It's an uphill push on a variety of levels. But in my mind, I think, how do we as a as a team come together to talk about what is it we really want to tell. So there's so much that we do on a daily basis, right? We can't go into extreme detail and depth on every thing that we do. For me, the point is to say, this year, what are we doing that means the most to what people or whom, right? Whether it's the state funders, whether it's NIFA, it might be locally, it might be like, for example, there's this thing going on right now called the COVID pandemic, right? So what have we done during the last 8 to 10 weeks that somebody who is interested in investing us would be really interested in knowing, right? And so maybe these other things that we've done historically that we think are really important, they're still important, but right now the story we want to tell is all about our COVID response. And so for me, it's the ability to have that conversation to say, organizationally, what's the most important thing right now, right? Or what we're anticipating in the next 6 to 12 months, right? So we can start to assume community economics, right? And agriculture and rural economics overall, and how we respond as a community, right? And as a state, our ability to impact that programmatically, I think it's fairly safe to say that, if we can report on those efforts in the next 6 to 18 months, most likely there will be people that have invested in us or want to invest in us that will say, that's exactly the kind of thing either we needed, we wanted, or we want more of, right? And so it's that ongoing conversation and understanding what we do, and then putting ourselves in a position organizationally, programmatically, to be able to tell those stories.
So I'm going to stop for just a moment to see if anybody wants to jump in on the conversation, have a comment, or piggyback a question. Okay, then I'm going to ask Greg a couple more questions. So, Greg, I talked about that culture of reporting in our organization. How do you think we go about making that cultural shift, making that happen in extension? I won't stretch it as far to say as making it so that everybody's delighted every month to enter their data, but at least they're say, oh, this is something I have to do and it's important, and so I'm going to do it. How do we do that cultural shift?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's probably, of all you sent me, the hardest one. But for me, when I think about culture shift, it's not something you don't wake up on a Tuesday after Memorial Day weekend and say, okay, this is how we want to work now, and everyone says, sure, let's do that. It'll take some time, but for me, to move culture requires us to think about how we want to work and how we lead ourselves as an organization differently. And so when I think now about, why should I report anything on a regular basis, if not more than annually, when it's not really viewed, but for an annual basis, right? And so if you're telling organizationally, Greg, you need to have this done by January 15th. Hello, 99 out of 100 people will say, okay, I'll put that on my to-do list for January 14th, right? And so, what does that do? What kind of ability does that give us to tell real-time stories about the impact of our work, right? And the return on investment that's made in us when we don't have really good data, but for, January 15th, right? And so now we're telling stories based on things we may have done back a whole year ago, or 10, 11 before, because we didn't have that data. So step one, I think, is what you're talking about, this dashboard. If we could see, right, like I get an email every day, the OSU Government Affairs Group has a daily email with a snapshot that says cases of COVID in Ohio, right? Confirmed cases, those admitted, and deaths. And so you're literally seeing real data every day. And if they waited till the end of this to give us some numbers, nobody would be thinking about COVID right now, right? And so I think to myself, how do we organize our system in a way where all of us, not just not just the people that are trying to communicate our message at the state level, right? But someone in a county office or a state program can go to a web page and say, wow, this is like a real-time snapshot of our particular efforts on a particular programmatic emphasis, right? So all of a sudden your data becomes important, right? On a much more frequent basis than once a year. So that I think is a place to start, right? So show me as an extension educator why what I did yesterday matters by Friday, right? So that's step one. I think another way you can look at this too, when we're evaluated formally on an annual basis, and that evaluation comes several months after well, in some cases, it could be like almost a year after I've done the work or more. All of a sudden my work seems like, well, I know what I do, but it's not that important. But if I'm being evaluated in some way on a more frequent basis, and I'm not saying it's a formal performance review, but if we're increasing the frequency with which we're looking at the work that we do, like if my supervisor were to look at my work on a quarterly basis, or even every other month, and say, Greg, you're making great headway on this, this, and this, and I know this other thing was one of your goals, but you're telling me you haven't made any headway yet. Is there something I can do to help? Or maybe it's not that time of year yet, right? So I think these are the kinds of things we can do organizationally to change the way we look at telling the story about what it is we're doing through our reporting, whether it's our annual performance review changing, or whether it's how we use the annual reporting window where we're collecting information that we ultimately turn into stories. So to make that more frequent, I think is one way to change the mindset in terms of frequency of reporting.
Thank you. So my last question, and I think I have heard some of the answer to this question already, so I'm going to tell you what I think you said. My last question to you was, many attempts have been made at reporting systems that have failed, across this country in extension systems. And it's not just extension, right? It happens in other organizations. So I was wondering what you thought we must do, we have to do to ensure success. So I think I just heard you say, first of all, we have to have timely information. So if there's a large issue that we're dealing with, like COVID-19, we have to have the information coming out about that in a timely manner. Timeliness also in terms of performance reviews. We're checking in, saying, looking at our work, how's it match up to what we planned, or the data that we have. And then tied into that also to frequency of the data. So timeliness, frequency, and reviewing the data. I've heard those three big pieces. Is there anything else?
Well, for me, I think you heard correctly. For me, I go back to how we're describing success, right? And for it to be successful, it generates information that is useful not only to us to help guide our efforts, whether it be programmatically or professionally with your performance coaching, but also the kind of content we can give to our stakeholders, whether they're funders or potential funders, right? The thing, I guess, that I somehow, and call me naive and an idealist, but I think it could be simple, right? For it to be successful, right? The one thing in my mind, I think the secret to any high productive organization is healthy, happy, productive employees. What do we have to do to have healthy, happy, productive employees? And if we're making, well, I think we work here because we love the work, right? So, that's step one. People, they don't work here to get rich. They work here because they feel a calling, and it moves them, right? In many cases, very deeply. But the part of the work that I think people dread is the telling of their story. Even if it's as simple as your relative last weekend at the family barbecue saying, so what do you do, right? And you scratch your head and think, oh, if I were just a banker or a lawyer where I could say, right? It's not that easy. So yeah, if we can do those three things you highlighted and make it simple, I just think like it doesn't have to be so hard. We don't have to spend tons and tons and tons of time on something that I think in most cases people scratch their head and say, where does this go? Why do I do this? So whatever we can do to make it easier, I think would help ensure success, and as well as the cultural shift and the buy-in.
Yeah, so we have one comment in the chat box. Pat says there's a need to concentrate on the impact and stop trying to report every single thing we do out of fear.
And you see that, we see that in the faculty dossiers when we have probationary and tenured faculty submitting their dossiers for promotion. I mean, your tendency is to want to make sure you don't leave anything out, right? Everything that you've done over the course of whatever that time frame for you might be, you want to put it in there somewhere. And I think we probably run into the same situation when we're doing our annual performance report. I think, Pat, I know you and I have talked about this before. Like, you end up losing the key message, right? So more does not necessarily make it better. It's the story you're trying to tell that really should be the focus. And so it's not quantity over quality. And I think that's part of the cultural shift. And it may come back, you know, I think Pat mentioned fear in there, and you're saying to yourself, well, if I don't put in my dossier every single thing I've done, I may not get tenured, I may not get promoted. But if you lose really the point of what you've been focusing on over the course of your career in that particular time frame, if it's lost, you know, the forest and the trees, and in the end, the reader can't really make sense of the impact of your efforts, that return on investment. If it's not clear, then you're absolutely not helping yourself. Simple. We have to make it simple.
Yeah.
I don't think everybody realizes that there's fear in there, but as an area leader, I hear it from A&P staff, from the support staff, from the faculty. There's fear underlying. I need to try to put everything in there, and I get so nervous and fearful that I get things put in the wrong place, and then I'm stuck with that whole spinning my wheels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Joe's comment talks about how things feel forced. The one thing that I really appreciate about the A&P promotion process and how it has changed is the 3-page narrative. And I don't know if we've got folks in this group here today that have any familiarity with that. It's only been a couple of years now, but the 3-page narrative in my mind is probably the best part of the A&P promotion process, in that it really requires you to stop and say, what have I done? What has been the impact of that, right? And so you think about your extension engagement efforts, you think about your creative and your scholarly work, and you think about your service, whether it's to the community or the local office or the organization, and you're literally saying, these are the things I've done and here's the impact that it's made. And it really, it forces you to tell a story in 3 pages. And it's not, there's no, you know, drop down boxes, there's no click here, pick this indicator kind of a format. And so I think if we could move ourselves to a place where we're thinking more like that, right? And you have some time to write it. It's not like you've just been confronted, you know, in the elevator or in the street on the way to the local diner at lunch, and you run into the commissioner. So it really gives us time to start to think through and try to put our efforts into words. And hopefully, Joe, it doesn't feel so forced, because you're literally writing it like, I did this, and this is why it mattered.
So what we would like to do now is take about 5 minutes and go to breakout rooms. And I showed you the example. I showed you a dashboard. I showed you an infographic. I showed you, well, I didn't show you a video, but I said, you know, video certainly is one of those ways that we have, one of those tools for reporting. And so I'd like to turn the conversation back to you. And so as I'm thinking about dashboards, I'm thinking about what goes into Vita, or maybe what doesn't go into Vita. What do you think if you were to say, T, we got to have this in a report right now, or Greg, we need to be able to produce a dashboard that has this data. What would it be? Like if you could come up with 3 to 5 things in your breakout group that you could feed back to us, because that's part of what we're trying to do. We're trying to figure out what's the most important thing. If we could spend probably 5 years getting everything into a dashboard, but we want to have some quick successes. So I'm going to put you in some breakout rooms. And if somebody would just volunteer in that breakout room to take notes and to come back, and we'll see what ideas we have, and we'll type those in the chat box. All right. Almost there. A little slow with this today. Sorry about that.
Hey Terry, it's Heather Reister. I came back because I was the only one in my breakout room. Yeah. You're on mute. Terry, I think you're on mute. I can't hear you.
Sorry. Yeah,
That's
I'm
okay.
going to move you. That's weird. Okay.
That's okay. I went in and I didn't hear anybody, but Danae was in there and I can't, somebody else was in there, can't remember. And I couldn't hear anything and they were on non-video and mute. So I thought, well, maybe somebody just needs to talk. So I unmuted and then they both disappeared. So I came back to the main session and they weren't in the main session. So I went back to the breakout room and they still were gone. So I don't know.
Okay. Okay. I've got a help request. I'll be back in a
Yeah, no worries. I'm fine. I'll just wait.
like we're the only room that came back so far.
They have eight seconds, 7. All right.
Oh, we are back there.
Got some folks back, yeah. So thank you all. What I would like to do just as we wrap up is we just got a couple of minutes. If some of you could type in the chat box, especially if, like you said, oh, I'll take some notes for the group. Back to the question of, what is it that we need to be able to put our fingers on, as Greg was talking about, that, what do we need available to us? What do we need for reports? Those pieces of data that are most critical. Not talking about your faculty annual reports. Or if you'd like to open up your mic and talk a little bit, that'd be great too. We've dropped off a lot of people, so don't be afraid to do that.
Greg, I think one thing it's challenging, kind of the required, who learned new information, who plans to change. That is really kind of the bottom line required. That's the bottom line of what VITA and so many of our reporting, the many that we've done over the past decade. And so it's really hard to create an interesting story out of learn new, plan changes. And so maybe to have a little, I don't know how, I'm just throwing it out there, but maybe some more nuanced kind of thinking with people. But that gets at, so you need, instead of 2 minutes at the end of something, you need 10 minutes to really get at these questions, or more, that gets to be a little more qualitative, which is time to analyze those things. So, but I'm just throwing it out there with learn new and plan changes. You're almost, hands are tied to tell an interesting story from that.
Yeah, thank you, Joseph.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that David Marison shared with us last week, was we really need to allow more time when we're evaluating our programs for participants to actually fill out meaningful responses to our evaluations, instead of giving them like 3 minutes at the end of a program to try to fill something out.
Other thoughts? You could leave some notes in the chat box, that would be extremely helpful. It's group 1, way to pull data from systems to generate a 1-page infographic. Yep, system with filters. Got it. Yep, our reg data. Yeah, flexibility. Okay, so Greg, anything you'd like to say as we wrap up?
Hey, Greg, do you want to talk about what we heard in our group? Because I think it's a little bit different.
Yeah, I definitely. I want to thank you, first of all, for including me. And I know, Teresa, you're right. We've been, you and I, talking about this now for months, and I feel like we're starting to make a little headway, which is always very encouraging. I'm optimistic about that. Debbie's absolutely right. I think it's cool too. And I was just trying to type this in when you asked me to share a few words, but the idea of how, we're reporting enough information that folks who are also seeking programming ideas can say, well, look at these kinds of outcome measures, right? And if this is what I'm trying to achieve, what did they do, right? What programmatically did they do to achieve them? So that side of reporting that helps inform actually program planning, I think that's really the focus of what we talked about. But I think overall, I guess the last thing I would say is I'm encouraged by the number of people that dialed in for today's conversation, and I'm very thankful for the work. I know we had a wide variety of participants here in today's conversation, just from the small group that we had an opportunity to talk to, Debbie and I. So That's definitely, no matter your position, faculty or A&P and educator, or no matter, right, your position, we all organizationally have a role and a responsibility in this. This is our product, right? Our product is change. And so whether it's individuals or communities or organizations, whatever it might be, we have to know how to tell that story. So thank you for being part of that.
And thanks to all of you for coming today. It was really nice to have this Q&A, Greg. I really like that. It was enjoyable. Thank you for being willing to do that. And thanks to all of you. Keep up the great work. And we'll be back tomorrow with Melinda and Pat. So join in. Thanks. Take care.
Thank you for your presentation.
See you, Godwin.
See you.
Thank you.
See you, Ken. Bye, Joseph. All right, we're down to the LOD bunch again.
Yeah, that's good. I like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
A little different.
Yeah.
I didn't think we would lose. Did we lose people when you split out in breakout rooms? Is that when everybody left?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Sure enough.
I thought we had a pretty good number going into the breakout rooms.
Yeah. Yeah. People started dropping kind of like flies at that point. But I was really surprised at the number that we had starting out. I mean, 50-some people. Right?
Yeah, I think the highest I saw was 58.
Yeah.
But Jared probably knows better.
So I'm pleased. Very pleased.
Yeah, I think that was a nice format.
Cool. All right, so we've got Debbie and Brian. We've got check-ins this afternoon, and then do you guys want to overlap any to talk about like this session or the rest of the week?
I don't know. Do we need to overlap, Debbie?
Anything?
I'm not sure. We don't have another. I think when we talked last week about reporting, we said we were going to like hold off until next week so that I can focus on the federal report this week and the sessions that I have to offer this week.
Yeah. Yeah, I worked a little bit, although I was embarrassed to show it, on like trying to come up with something, what a report might look like. But, you know, it's really hard. When I open up the spreadsheet, I'm like, dang. It's hard to think about. So I just got those other examples for people to look at because I didn't want Amy Kay to be so embarrassed.
Those were really nice examples that you shared though.
Yeah, they're good. I told you the first thing I learned in data visualization training is I've been doing it all wrong anyway. So who am I?
Oh,
yeah,
man.
Stephanie's good that way.
Yeah, I was asking her how it was going to Debbie, and she said, yeah, well, I've learned that everything I'm doing is wrong. Okay.
I mean, it's good. I'm learning, but it's pretty funny when you walk in there and they're like,
okay,
this or this or this.
Okay, so Debbie, do you still want to meet at 2:30, or you need to keep trucking with your other stuff?
If that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right.
Cool. All right.
All right.
So
I
Ryan,
will see you then.
You do want to meet or not meet?
Yes, I do.
Yes, you do. Okay, got it. Okay, I'll see you guys after a while.
Yep.
Sounds
See you
good.
later.
Okay.
Okay, see ya.
Bye.